This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. And today we've got a name that, for a lot of folks in the Upper Great Lakes region, folks that know Lake Superior, the Keweenaw Peninsula, Upper Michigan, a name that is ubiquitous with that region, and that is Charles Esshbach. Also, we know him as Charlie, and we'll talk with him in just a moment. But you got a hold of him because you saw him at something, and here we are. What was that about?
Oh, you know how it is. Well, first of all, we're talking right now. It's October, and that's when all the hardwoods put their party dresses on, and it is absolutely spectacular. You get up to the top of Brockway Mountain and you're looking around and you understand what the entire peninsula, the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula, when you talk about the Keweenaw. But you know, it's not always the hardwoods. There's also an amazing tract of trees up there, and my wanderings around, of course, you're going to have a guide who's a forester and a photographer and a storyteller, and there's none better than Charlie Esshbach. So having him with us today, we're going to learn a lot about the history of that tip of the Keweenaw.
Well, let's get right into it. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, glad to have you. I mean, you are someone that is a walking history of that region, and a lot of that. You've spent over a half a century in the Upper Peninsula and exploring the Keweenaw, which, for those that don't know, is it really, as Frida said, the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the part that kind of juts out into Lake Superior. What is it about this area of the country that keeps you, doing your books and your photos and guiding hikes? What is it that really works for you about it?
Well, the Keweenaw is about everything that I'm about. I'm an outdoor person. I was trained as a forester. I worked as a forester. My dad was a good photographer, so I naturally picked up a camera and worked myself through college as a photographer at Michigan Tech. And after I went to work as a forester, was working down in Wisconsin. They called me up one day and asked me if I wanted to be their first university photographer. So I held that job for 16 years and then started my own company working across the UP and working as a volunteer simultaneously with the Michigan Nature Association, which has over 50 nature sanctuaries in the Upper Peninsula. So I eventually ended up going on their staff and managing and writing management plans and taking care of all those sanctuaries in the UP. So I've been the photography, the nature, the forestry, and then just a love for this for what's in the Keweenaw. Working with the M&A, where we're preserving rare habitat, we're preserving rare plant communities. Was just right down my alley. So I learned as the years went by, and they always say your backyard the best, and Keweenaw is my backyard.
What a marriage made in heaven, a forester that's also a photographer. But Charlie, over 50 years ago, what was it that took you to that amazing tract? And just let our listeners know a little bit about the Estivants and what that was up there in Copper Harbor.
Yeah, the Estivant Pines, that's what we call them today. It was a stand of virgin hardwood, northern hardwood timber that had big groves of old eastern white pine, the Michigan state tree. And these trees are 400 to 500 years old, and they were purchased, the land was purchased by a Frenchman by the name of Estivant, and he was interested in copper mining back in the 1850s. Mm-hmm. So, but they never found much copper on his land. They found some, but and that far up the peninsula, most of the copper veins pinched out really shallow. So they would take off and make lots of money at the start, and then they would fail. So he held on to the land, and his agent, he never came here, but his agent told him that the only thing on his land that might return him a little bit of money was the old big trees. And he said, "No, I'm not into lumber." So the trees stood, and nobody cut them until 1949. He passed them on to his son, and his son came here, made a deal with Calumet and Hecla, and sold them. And Calumet and Hecla then in the fall of 1970, put out a contract to log them. Then I was asked, some local people, older people up in the Keweenaw, that residents that knew about the big pines, then blew the whistle and said, we really should save a patch of these old trees. We shouldn't cut them all down. So eventually I was notified to go up there and get some pictures of them. And that's the way it started.
Well, is that how it kind of is, that you got this gig to go up and take these photos? So really through photography is where you kind of learned about these pines, where they are?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'd heard about them, but I'd never been there.
Yeah. So, all right, you go up there and you start taking these photos and everything. What did you find, and what was going on around that time in terms of awareness of maybe what these trees were and what may be lost if they were harvested?
Yeah, it was the environmental movement hadn't really hit the Upper Peninsula because a lot of our economy is based on forest products, mm-hmm. and so the idea of not cutting trees was foreign. So we ran into a lot of questions when we would talk about let's save this, because some of my classmates from Tech would say, "Charlie, what's going on? You're putting loggers out of work." Right. It was they thought I was a traitor here, to the profession. Yeah, so it hadn't really started. So, but there was the Michigan Nature Association. Got involved. They really didn't want to. They were a downstate organization, and this was so far away, they were hesitant, but they came to one of our meetings. We called a meeting, and about 25 or 30 people showed up, and at the end of the meeting, they were asked who would be interested in joining a citizens committee to try to save the Estivant Pines. And so we 17 people raised their hand, and that became the Citizens Committee. And we worked for 3 years to get the logging stopped. So in 1973, we got a halt to the logging, and then we kept negotiating for a purchase. And we finally purchased 200 acres. Was our first purchase. Mm-hmm. And then it went on there. The last purchase, the last addition to the Estivant Pines Sanctuary, was purchased in 2010.
Really?
So we've been working on this for a long time, and there's many chapters to this. We had trespasses where loggers would venture over the line into the preserve and knock down a few of the big old trees, and so then have to negotiate for a buffer zone, and the company didn't want to do that, and so it was a long campaign with lots of setbacks.
Can I ask you this real quick, Charlie? With when you first started doing this, and you said there was like logging that was going on for about 2 or 3 years, how aggressive was that when that was going on? Was it pretty strong, or I mean, what was going on at that point?
Well, there was a single logger, Bob Kader from Lake Linden. He had the contract, and he was having a tough time. When I photographed him at first, it was winter time, and as you know, the snow was deep, the trees were huge, his equipment was old, and so he was struggling. And the trees, because they're so old, they have similar things wrong with them that us humans do. Their bones get brittle.
Yeah.
And so when you saw them in the lumber, the boards aren't very high quality. There wasn't a large market for pine in those days. There isn't now. And so he was having a tough time making a living cutting these trees. So the photographs that I took were quite dramatic because he had to use extra big bulldozers to skid these 5 foot, 6 foot diameter logs that were 16 foot long out of the woods through the deep snow.
Charlie, we need to let our listeners know, when you talk about snow, let's just let them know, what is that average snowfall, would you say, in Copper Harbor in the Keweenaw?
Well, the county measuring point is Delaware, which is down from Copper Harbor towards Eagle Harbor. And the average there, I believe, over all these decades is about 230 inches.
Yeah, that is some serious amount of snow.
Yeah, 230 inches divided by 12. Do the math, and you get a feel for it. Yeah. And then the other thing is anticipating the diameter and the height of these trees. Charlie, they're maybe over 100 feet tall?
Yes, there's a few of them that are close to, they're all over 100 feet. There's quite a few of them that are close to 150.
And anybody that has been to that neighborhood and understands you are not going to find a flat spot anywhere.
No.
That part of the Keweenaw was formed by a series of lava flows. So, and then the glaciers scraped them all down, and so there's very thin soil. These trees hold on to the bedrock up there and face the perils of Lake Superior blizzards. And it's amazing that they're still there.
Real quick, I just want to remind everybody we're talking with Charlie Esshbach here today, conservationist, really talking about the Estivant Pines that are located in the Keweenaw Peninsula, the tip of Upper Michigan into Lake Superior. Charlie, you're talking about this like 50 years ago. You mentioned that there wasn't really this understanding of conservationist thought, and you're right. At that point, this was lifeblood of the community. How did you get, obviously you said like 17 people stepped up and said they were willing to put their name on the line, so to speak. But how did you get that? How was that support, and where did some of the best support come from?
Well, our first, as you can imagine, we needed to educate the public on why we should save them. That these are the last. There isn't any more of these up here in the UP. There's 5 trees here and 10 trees there, but there's no contiguous stand of old. The original forest, going back to the beginning, so education was our big challenge. Mm-hmm. So of course I made a slideshow, and we would bring that slideshow to anybody that would let us come. So we'd go to the Kiwanis and the Rotary and the Lions and the sportsmen's clubs. And anybody that would let us come, we would come and give our presentation. And in in those citizens groups, we would get the questions then, well, Charlie, why should we save them? They're so far up there, and there isn't any really good roads up there to them, and why should we save them? Why should we give you our money out of our treasury to help you save them? So it was an uphill challenge, and then but gradually we started getting some support, and our local radio station WMPL, Dick Storm, he was putting out the word and helping us all he could, and Milwaukee Journal, which was our UP Sunday paper. We used to run pictures. John Stanley was a state editor, and he was from Lake Linden, so he had a soft spot for the Keweenaw. He would run all the pictures that I would send down there, and so we gradually gained, and people got behind us. But the most surprising group of people that supported us from the very beginning were the kids, the school kids.
Really?
When the word got out, there were high schools all the way to Detroit that raised money for us. But the real eye-opener was that first year we went to the state fair in Escanaba. And I had, of course, lots of big enlargements of the pines being cut down and the pines, the groves of pines. And we had a couple of cookies that we'd cut out off of some of the big logs so people could see, had them all dated so that, you could look on the log and see when Lincoln was shot, when, all the different dates in history in the tree rings. And so we were there for a whole week of the state fair. And on Thursday of the state fair was Safety Patrol Day.
Of course.
If you had a kid that served on his school safety patrol, they got to come to the fair with free admission and everything. So there was hundreds of kids there at the state fair, and the kids would come by our spot there and look at our pictures and look at all of our signs and everything and drop their quarters in the bucket. And we raised more money that day, and most of it was quarters, than we did the whole rest of the week of State Fair. So from then on, the kids led the way.
Yeah, that's it. That right there has to be an important part of this story, though, Charlie. I mean, it's like these kids then became the next generation, and they were off. And we know now in the last 50 years in particular, these kids have gone off to do things, and we know a lot more about conservation, and we know a lot about that. And that surprises me that they embraced it so well. But I also grew up in the region up there, and I'm pretty sure if I dig back into my memory banks, I remember at my school in Chassel, I'm sure we were doing some stuff about this because I remember this very well for myself. But then you move into this now and you have 50 years of it starting to pick up, and you talk about, Charlie, these photos and everything that you have done. What did you do with those photos beyond that? I mean, did you put a book out or something, did you not? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, after we stopped the logging and formed the preserve, and then we built some trails and invited people to come and see them. Then everybody was asking me when I go out in public and of course in the Michigan Tech community, how did you guys do that? You worked so long at it. It looked like such a futile effort. How did you do it? And I got tired of telling the story because it wasn't just a simple answer.
Right.
And so I tried to write it down. I tried to write a manuscript, and I would do it after work in the evening, and it just wasn't working. I would read what I had written yesterday, and it didn't. And what I was thinking about today, it wasn't working. So there's a cabin up on Keweenaw Point. that belongs to the Jaskalainen family, and they never put a lock on the door. And I was aware of the cabin.
Okay.
So I put on my skis and skied back there, and the heaviest thing in my pack was a typewriter and a gallon of Coleman fuel for my lantern.
And you went.
And I spent the week pounding out the book called From Sawmill to Sanctuary, which told the whole story in detail about how we had, as the Citizens Committee had done, and all of our failures and all of our victories, and how it had happened. And I published that then in 1976. And it's almost out of print now. I've reprinted it once.
So then, okay. I mean,
I just love that. You know, Charlie, first of all, God bless you. Anybody that's listening and says, "Oh, I have to take my laptop with me to the Holiday Inn," and we're talking to a man that skied. Lordy, I mean, I've skied to the North Pole. I've skied at the South Pole. I don't know if I could make it to the Jaskalainen cabin with. I mean, I can't imagine what that weighed. And yeah, you had your Coleman fuel. I know you probably also had maybe a pint of bourbon and some chili, maybe a few pasties in there.
Right. Yeah.
It's such a great story. It's such
Precious.
a UP story, such a great, important story about that. The book was called From Sawmill to Sanctuary, so you're almost out of that. What are you looking to do more with this story? Where are things with that? Because this is a wonderful story that needs to continue on.
Yes, it does. And when I came to when I realized that it's been 50 years, that kind of really blew me away. So my wife looked at me, and I had two file cabinets in my two file drawers in my cabinet that were strictly Estivant Pines stuff, all the meetings, all of the stuff we went through. And so she said, "You're the only one that can write the book of the 50-year battle here and what has happened in the 50 years." So I started digging through that stuff and committing to all those defeats and victories, and so I started writing in the middle of COVID, and I punched out 28 chapters. At the same time, right after COVID, I went to work for Finlandia University. They needed a teacher for a photography class. Mm-hmm. And with that job, I got a dark room.
Oh, okay.
And so I was able to go back into those black and white negatives that I shot in 1970 and print all of those. So that was the key. The book is going to document all of that, mostly through the pictures.
Yeah. See, now I want to jump in on this real quick, because you said the words were not coming to you, but you've spent your life doing photography. It's like that's really where the magic is in this story, isn't it? To have those photos.
Sure. Well, yeah. As a photographer, I worked for several newspapers when I was getting started, and my writing ability was only for writing photo captions.
Yep.
I wasn't too good at writing long pieces and putting it together. After I wrote the Sawmill to Sanctuary, I had it edited by a tech English professor, and he let me know that I needed help in my writing ability. And so I went back to school. They had 3 terms of classes, 3 courses called creative writing at Tech, and I took those and revolutionized my writing ability. So I'm fortunate in that my son's wife is a high school teacher, and she's good in English. She's my editor, and So she makes me sound good. And my son is a graphic designer. He makes me look good. So that's why we do the Keweenaw Traveler, which is our local Keweenaw tourist information piece that I started 35 years ago. That's another story.
For another time, yeah, I'm sure. But this is a real family affair that you're doing here. This is great.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did 28 chapters. There's over 70 black and white pictures and a lot of modern digital color pictures and so forth that I've done. And the book is, I'm still writing the last chapter. You know, as a 81-year-old guy who has spent all of this time in the woods up there, and through all of this, that last chapter is a hard one to write. How do you put all of this into the proper perspective? What was the real value of what we did? You know, to me, the thing that continues to amaze me about the whole thing was the fact that our little committee of 17 people persevered, you know, and myself and a fellow by the name of Jim Rooks, we were the negotiators. We were the guys that were meeting with the company, and went all the way to Chicago to meet with Universal Oil several times. We would come in with our tongues on the ground. We were whipped. We had too many setbacks, and to a committee meeting, and they would pump us back up and kick us back out there. And we persevered through this whole thing. That's the amazing thing. And in the meantime, we educated the public and got them behind us to support us. And so that's the story.
Well, maybe that's the way it wraps up. You know, I mean, that there will be another chapter of this, I'm sure, because those efforts have paid off to generations now that are 2-3 generations now that are going to be able to see it, and that's really the key thing there. You
know, the Marquette 4th grade teacher in Vandenboom School who fired up her 4th graders, and then let's see if we can raise enough money to save one of those big trees. And they did the math, and they figured it was each one of them trees on what they were asking as a asking price. Each tree was worth $158. So they started raising money any way they could to save a tree. Well, after they saved a tree pretty easily, then they went on from there. And, well, to make a long story short, they got all the 4th graders in Marquette County interested in this. Mrs. Debbie Verzetti, the teacher, she ended up being an outstanding teacher in Michigan and got some national honors, went to Washington with her and took her class and representatives of her class to Washington and she has pictures of them with all the politicians, and the thing I remember about it is when Channel 6 showed the news clip of Mrs. Verzetti receiving the awards for her Estivant Pine project back in Marquette, Michigan. President George H. Bush horribly mispronounced the word Estivant. That's about all I remember about it. It was so long ago. But Charlie,
you got to share with them. Remember the kids that did the can drive? You know, in Michigan we have the deposit law. So even back then, share what happened with those kids and they were doing the can drive. I love this part of the story too.
Yeah, I believe it was. Well, the Marquette Mining Journal had been following Mrs. Verzetti's class, and then they got other schools involved, and it was. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up which school it was, but I believe it was an eastern Marquette County, Sands out that way. One of those schools had a can drive, and they raised a whole bunch of. they collected a whole bunch of cans, and they were very proud of the fact that they had a couple $100 worth of cans, and somebody stole them.
Oh, jeez.
And so the Mining Journal picked up the story right away, of course, and the word got out, and people started ponying up, and they raised 10 times the amount of cans they had collected.
Well, there you go.
I love it.
Charlie, how can people find out a little bit more about you, your work, all this effort, the books, maybe photos? Is there a place that they can see this for themselves?
Well, the biggest place that I have out there now, or the only place I have out there now, I published the Keweenaw Traveler, which comes out 4 times a year during our tourist season. So that has a Facebook page, Keweenaw Traveler. There's also a website called Follow the Traveler. So as the book goes to press, and as it's available on the market, then people will be able to get updates and get the news on where they can pick it up and so forth. And there'll be a couple there'll be bookstores all around the western end of the UP that'll be carrying it, and they'll be able to get one if they would like. It's going to be a nice book. It's large format, so that I make the pictures nice and large.
Good. That's a good thing.
I also have a kid's book that I published that goes along with the Estivant story. I was hiking through the woods one day and saw a little pine seedling, 3 inches high, which was growing in the compost at the base of a big old pine stump that had been harvested 50, 60 years ago and was slowly rotting away. And I said, there's my voice. I've always wanted to educate kids on forest ecology, how we must take care of our forests. And so I named him Twig. And Twig tells the story of how his old forest grows, the Estivants. And so a lot of the pictures are from the Estivant sanctuary. And he tells us, he takes his own pictures in the book, writes his own captions for the pictures. And then on the opposite page, I talk about the science behind what Twig is talking about. So it's called Twig's Guide to My Old Forest, and it's a popular book around here in the Keweenaw.
Well, Charlie, I appreciate this, your time today. I mean, there's so much of your story that I feel like we just scratched the surface here, but I mean, it's just, we hope to get some of our listeners from out there, that there's a lot of people that listen that are into the outdoors, into the Great Lakes, into conservation and keeping it natural and keeping it real. And you were, flying this flag over 50 years ago, and the current generation appreciates it. And Charlie, you've just given us some great information today. It's been a pleasure having a chat with you.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of a mixed bag getting old, when you start to see that people are forgetting.
Yeah. Well, you got to keep telling the story. That's why it's good to have you on here.
Yeah, right. And I appreciate you. Well, it's been a lot of fun.
It's Charlie Esshbach, conservationist, talking about truly grassroots conservation and preservation of some natural history in the Keweenaw. And Frida, what a story, and what a guy that, you could almost hear the crackling fire in the background and a cup of coffee or something. And, he's sitting in a comfortable chair with a flannel on, just the way he's telling the story. But I mean, but talk about just unassuming about what he's really done.
Oh my goodness. When you think back to the national parks, if I'm correct in my history, I've been told that Teddy Roosevelt knew we needed to set them apart. And what he did is he sent Thomas Moran to paint, because there wasn't the photos yet,
right,
to paint Yellowstone and bring it back to Congress. And it was the art. just as Charlie's story about those photos. And then the other important piece of that, he went to the kids. It was the kids and the kids, you know, that story from the state fair and just pulling that together. And honest to goodness, it has been a glorious fall season. But Walt, that last chapter, I'm going to go catch up with Charlie. He just lives, you know, south of Houghton a little bit there. And we got to have some snow. But I will carry that typewriter in my backpack. All right. I got to get him to he's got to use a word processor. And let's go find that Jaskalainen cabin and let's, you know, I'll carry the kerosene and I'll take the bourbon and there'll be some coffee back there. And we'll put a few pasties. We'll stop at the Mohawk Superette, get a couple of pasties. And honest to goodness, to finish this last chapter, because this book, anybody that's looked at the cover of, you know, his book From Sawmill to Sanctuary. Wow. Imagine what's coming next.
Charlie Esshbach, our guest on the Lake Superior podcast today. Just a great story there. Now, if this actually maybe got you thinking about some other things that you'd like to hear Frida and I talk about, certainly reach out to us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. We're always interested in ideas because there are so many stories around the Big Blue, around the Big Lake, and Charlie was a great one to share with you today. So it was really nice to have him on, but that's pretty much going to do it for this latest Lake Superior podcast. Look for all of them at the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website and share these on social media when you get the latest episode. We certainly appreciate when you do that. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees, independently owned and operated since 1993. Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.